Hello everyone, welcome. We know that there are a lot of sessions to attend today and we compete over different sessions. It's a pleasure to have all of you here. Thank you very much for coming. My name is Kiran Rao. I'm the Director of Product Management at VMware. I'm in the End User Computing Business Unit. I am responsible for all the 3D graphics that we do closely with NVIDIA. For Horizon, I'm also responsible for the Blast Extreme protocol, Horizon clients, and also Linux VDI. Thank you for being here.
My name is Luke Wignall, and I direct the performance engineering and tech marketing teams for professional visualization at NVIDIA. So it's my teams that are, for example, brought all the demos, some of which you're going to see some videos of here. They're down in the NVIDIA booth, as well as the user experience that's in the VDI Complete booth. Please go check those out.
It's a standard disclaimer that our legal team asked us to put out. We're very happy to share the information that we have worked together for the last over a year. I hope you take away a lot of new things from this session that make it even more powerful for you to go and deploy Grid within your environment. We have a great agenda for you today. We're going to talk about some of the graphic use cases, just to set the stage. We're going to talk about what VMware and NVIDIA have done together in the last year. I'm sure many of you attended the Grid sessions last year. Can I get a show of hands? How many of you came to the session last year, NVIDIA Grid? That's a good chunk. You're going to see a lot of new exciting things that we have done over the last year. We're going to have a guest speaker. We always love to have customers on stage. It's a validation of the effort that we put in, and especially when you hear that from a customer, that helps you as well, and you can reach out to the customer as a reference to seek what they're doing and how you can take advantage of some of the work that they've done for your own environments. And finally, if we have time, we'll do sizing of the desktop. If not, we'll have those slides in the reference section, and you can always find it handy when you download the slides later. Okay? Quick show of hands. How many of you have done Grid deployments today within your organizations? That's a great number.
It's a fantastic number.
That's almost like 60% of the audience. If I'm wrong, shout out and say it's 20, but I saw 60% of the hands go up. So enterprises are transforming, and virtualization is enabling that transformation. Virtualization has many key benefits, both from a user perspective and from an IT admin perspective. When it comes to a user, they're able to get high-performance desktops. If they want additional desktops, it's a matter of minutes before which an IT admin can spin up additional desktops and provide it to them, versus the traditional way where they had to go acquire new workstations, physical workstations, and it took a while for them to get access to it. Now it happens within a matter of minutes. Mobility is a key. I'm pretty sure that you all work round the clock in different locations with many different devices. It's always important for you to get access to your applications, to your desktops, anywhere you are, even at this trade show. Work doesn't stop just because you're attending a conference. You're expected to go and be productive in your spare time and attend these sessions, and you probably go back to your hotels and continue to do your work, which means that you want to have the same experience in a hotel room that you would have within your LAN environment. Enabling this helps you with improved productivity. You can be working from home. You can be traveling on a plane, but you can continue to do your work. That results in significant improvements from a productivity perspective. As an IT admin, it brings a lot of benefits. You have centralized management, where you have full control of the resources, the application, the data. At the same time, you're providing access to that information in a seamless way to your end users. It helps to simplify support, and more importantly, it keeps your data secure.
To talk about all of these benefits without talking about what those users require. And if we were just talking about virtual PC or just simple business desktops, this would all still be very important. However, when we start talking about 3D workloads and these more advanced workflows, things like that snappiness, that lack of latency, that attached by a rubber band is my favorite comment from an end user, right? It doesn't work for me because when I grab my model and I try to drag it, It feels like I have to stretch a rubber band and then it catches up, right? That they're looking for an experience that they expect in a local setting, and they expect that through all of the benefits that Kieran just rattled off, right? When they're remote, when they're in a congested Wi-Fi, they're looking for that experience. And frankly, as important as it is to deliver to a knowledge worker, it's exponentially more important to deliver to a higher end workflow. So if we're going to challenge all those user types, we need to meet all of those requirements.
So when I use my desktops, all my desktops are grid backed. Whether I'm on a plane or whether I'm in a hotel, snappiness is important for me. I cannot click on a screen and wait for it to refresh. That's not an experience that's acceptable. I want the same experience that I would get as though I have a workstation in front of me, and independent of the location. And that's what VMware and NVIDIA delivered together.
So I think the most important piece to understand is that what we're going to get into over the next several slides is a discussion about how we break down the barriers that are wrapped around some of these more extreme workflows, right? And some of these barriers, frankly, are built over long periods of time, like tradition. Like, I'm an engineer. I've got to have a glorious giant tower. If I don't have that glorious giant tower, I can't do my job. Not true, right? But prying their warm pink hands off of that tower is almost impossible until you shift culture and show them other benefits. So when we talk about what we're enabling and what this transformation piece, we're also transforming users. We're transforming the organization, right? The enterprise, which means that really what we're transforming are workflows, right? We're taking the concept of workspace and we're changing that. We're enabling it in ways that have never been enabled before, and the workflows that are underneath it, which means really this entire stack is getting blown wide open with the work that we're doing.
Luke, Windows 10 is driving a lot of changes within organizations. I'm pretty sure a lot of you would be curious, what will my user experience be if I migrate from Windows 7 to Windows 10?
Who here is currently migrating to Windows 10? Who has actually migrated to Windows 10? It's actually a decent percentage of the hands that went up first. And in general, has it been an easy, from a virtualization standpoint? One hand goes up when I said easy. Everybody talk to that guy. He has it figured out.
He was probably at Microsoft before and he learned all the tricks.
That was his thumb he put up, wasn't it?
Hey, +1 for the guy for
exactly.
putting in the effort.
So you can't have any of this conversation, right, about these 3D workflows if we just stare at the app, right, the line of business app. Okay, this engineer, he or she is doing work in CATIA, so I'm going to focus on CATIA. Because the reality is, even an engineer or an architect or whoever, right, they start and end their day probably on email or writing a report or doing a spreadsheet or something. They're knowledge workers. We're all knowledge workers. Every one of us in this room is fundamentally a knowledge worker, and then we layer on additional requirements, right? Things that we need to do to get our job done. And so if we're going to tell any part of this story, we can't ignore the fundamental starting point, which is the operating system. And with great pleasure, I dug up as many as I could show real quick. Let's run through these. Anybody who wants to question me on the ever-increasing need of graphics in just the operating system, do this exercise for yourself. We've come a long way, and it's not getting any lighter, right? Surprised nobody screamed when Vista went by. So, 32% more. That's not a trivial amount. We're struggling in our own testing at the Performance Engineering Lab. We've had to really work to get truly functional 512 meg profiles to function under Windows 10. It absolutely works. We have customers that can attribute that. One in this room. However, if you come over to, say, the VDI Complete booth and ask them to stare at some of the metrics, you'll see that Windows 10 and Office 2016 averages around 600 megs of frame buffer. 600 megs of frame buffer. And that's on a single display at 1440p. If I go to dual display, no way. Just doesn't work. You're pushing too many pixels.
And that's just the base operating system.
That's just the base operating system.
We're not talking about the applications that leverage the base operating system and are even more complex to deliver.
What a nice segue. So if you look at what, and again, we're still not at any big 3D app. I use the example that if you look at Word and you're scrolling Word and all those characters are marching up and down the screen as you scroll, or on a website or whatever, text, right? Every single one of those letters has a small amount of 3D shading to make it easier on your eyes to be able to read that. That's graphics. That may not be a pretty picture, it's just a lot of letters, but it's graphics, right? And if you look at the ever-increasing amount of graphics use in every one of these apps, then by the time I do deploy SolidWorks or AutoCAD or CATIA or Creo or whatever, I've already used how many resources just to get the fundamental functionality that an end user requires to have a great experience. And remember, the 3D user is going to expect the next level of performance, right?
So every 3D graphics worker is also a knowledge worker. Some of the applications that you see here, these are things that they use on a daily basis. This is the basis that forms for the user experience. If the user is not happy about the experience he gets with his knowledge worker apps, whether it's email, Skype for Business, forget about 3D. So this is really the fundamental for any organization, is to deliver a great knowledge worker applications. And then you build upon that for 3D graphics applications.
Absolutely. And remember, Microsoft's not looking to have things dialed back, right? So we all know that Windows 10 has been harder to optimize, right? To turn off that user experience piece than Windows 7 was. And it's only going to get harder because they're investing in user experience as well. So all elements that we're building up to here are investing in that user experience. But what about the far end? What about the highest level of professional users? Quadro has been our professional visualization graphics card for a couple of decades now. It is the fundamental leader. It represents over 80% of all professional users today. If you walk into an organization, well, let me actually take a step back. When I was an integrator myself doing virtual desktop deployments, you can tell by all the arrows in my back, it was really hard to deliver that user experience, right? To find that optimal experience. And the way that you saved your own skin was you said, hey, anybody using a GPU or a high-end app or whatever else, perfect, we can't help those people. You pushed them aside, right? You found the group that you had the greatest likelihood of success, and you started there. But everything has changed now, right? We've enabled all these user types. We're going to tell you more in greater detail as we go along, but the point is, instead of being afraid or dismissive of a Quadro user, right? This is 90% of the professional people that use a GPU to earn their wage, is the way we look at it. In order to get their life's work done, they need a GPU. Those are people that are making the most current movies, the stuff that we pay money to go get our heads blown by the graphics. Things like manufacturing design, the latest cars, right? The latest refrigerator. It doesn't matter. All this stuff has to be built and designed in these apps. That's how this work is done. And if the user is chained to that big tower, and that big tower, because it's so expensive and cumbersome and hard to manage, is chained to a desk, that is the least flexible possible way that an enterprise can be. And so transformation becomes very difficult. And that's not what they want, right? So if we look at the spectrum from the left side of this is pretty much the only thing we've focused on for the last, 15, 20 years in terms of VDI. We could do knowledge workers, we could do students, we could do healthcare, those simple app sets that we could deliver reasonably consistently with a good user experience. And when we built a lot of infrastructure around that to try to support it, everything from WAN accelerators, you name it, right? But what we're going to talk about today is blowing open the door all the way to the other side and begin to ask the question that as implementers, as customers, how are we able to better leverage VDI today if all of this is possible? All right, maybe not VR today, tomorrow, no. What is possible? How much more can we deliver for these enterprises?
But it's important to think about this. There's probably not a single customer meeting that I walk into where we're asked to talk about desktops and applications. It's probably the first 15 minutes of the conversation. Very quickly, it moves on to what IT is doing within the enterprise to transform the enterprise. IT is leading the charge for things that enterprises are doing. There's probably not a single large organization today that talks about analytics, right? They're deep into it. They want to know what their customers are doing. They're using data-driven decisions to make all the changes within their organizations. They use a lot of key functionalities, right? Whether it's VR or any of those things, they're investing into it. They want to be assured that the investment that their IT is making in the infrastructure is fully leveraged beyond delivering desktops and apps. Desktops and apps are becoming the fundamentals, but they're delivering beyond that. So IT is essentially transforming the enterprise today.
And keep in mind that every one of these is a GPU silo from our perspective in the data center. Some organization has an HPC cluster or an AI deep learning node, or they have this in their data center today. But it's all in silos, right? It's chained to the data center, so to speak. How can you make that different for them and enable them to transform their organization and do more, faster, better?
So let's take a look at what VMware Horizon and NVIDIA have done together in the last year to enable you to transform your enterprises. So a little bit of history. We started our journey by first integrating VGPU into vSphere in 2014. Mm-hmm. NVIDIA then announced the Grid software.
More of a platform. And the idea was, historically, it's really easy to just compartmentalize NVIDIA and say, we create GPUs, piece of hardware, done. But that's not true, because in Quadro, if you look at the difference between Quadro and our other products, the fundamental biggest difference is in the software. And it's the software that we've worked tirelessly with all the ISVs to put an optimization and acceleration into our driver stack, into our app stack, in order to provide that performance. It's that performance that has earned us that market share. It's what these users demand. They will say, I need SolidWorks to have that level of performance, that level of functionality. I need photorealism. I need ray tracing and rendering. I need these functions to work, and it won't work unless I have Quadro. So you have to answer that question. The only way to do this, though, with virtualization and with ecosystem partners, with any sort of transformational speed on our part, is to break hardware and software apart and create a platform. That allows us to move far, far faster. It's a very similar story what we're talking about enabling for our customers. And look at the difference in pace from development after we did that.
And to deliver all the work that you've done in the data center, it was important for us to come up with a new remote protocol, BlastExtreme, which would take complete advantage of the capabilities of the grid card. So we started working actively, and we introduced BlastExtreme last year in 2016. And we are now starting to see where we are building upon that particular protocol, and we are improving workflows. That's going to be the most of the session today. In addition to that, we quickly realized that with Windows 10, knowledge workers also needed graphics. So we brought in graphics for the knowledge workers.
Absolutely. So the M10 came on board. That gave us a lot more flexibility. And on another slide coming up, I'll really lay out a map that I hope will help you understand where all this stuff lays out. It's actually fairly, when you see the slide, it's fairly straightforward. But the goal was, how hard can we push on scalability while still maintaining performance? And then how far can we push on performance while still offering scalability? Handling that full spectrum and meeting all those needs.
So in addition to making sure that users had the best experience through BlastExtreme protocol, it was also important for us to make sure that IT admins were able to manage this well. Remember our first slide. It was about user experience. It was also about IT admins. So we put in a lot of work to simplify the life of IT admins. We had introduced high availability in early part of 2017. And then we brought in instant clone support.
Yes.
Instant clone is fantastic. If you think about creating one golden image that you can quickly spin across to thousands of users, if you want to apply a patch for a golden image, many of you are starting to deploy Windows 10. You're going to go through this, where you're going to have a golden image, you have to repatch it, update it, quickly deploy it across your enterprise. Some of the functionality we built in with instant clones is going to help you rapidly deploy those updates and without any user downtime.
And I think it's easy to look at that feature, right, that concept and say, oh, that's great for 10,000 knowledge workers. A certain car manufacturer that may or may not be in the center part of the United States was shocked to find out this was possible, because for their engineers, it takes them, they basically do a deployment methodology where they roll out a CATIA upgrade over approximately a 2-year period. That's a rollout of 2 years. How are you supposed to stay nimble on software if that's your pace of change? And when I said, why wouldn't you just make a golden master, test it with a user, and if it works, roll it out to all 10,000 that day? And it was such a paradigm shift, they literally couldn't grasp the concept. It just made no sense to them that that was possible. So there's an educational part here. You have to remember, just as we're opening these doors to these user types don't really know how much magic you bring to the table. I think that's an important piece.
Great. So all of these are things that our customers know about.
Right.
We've talked to them many times. We might not have talked to you in person, but we have had webinars, we have had conference calls, we have educated you about this. I'm pretty sure you're all curious to find out what's new. What do you guys want to tell us? Why are we a full house here, and what do you want to tell us? Let's get ready. You announced Grid in August.
Our August
We're going to
release.
talk a lot about your Grid release. We have a lot of tech previews planned for this session. And these are the things that you as customers have told us. You were interested in improving workflows. You wanted to make your life easier when it came to maintenance. You wanted the ability to transform your organizations. So that means you wanted greater control in terms of your desktops. We did a lot of enhancements around Blast Extreme protocol. We're going to take a look at that.
Just can't believe we got past that. Nobody brought up Vmotion. All right, never mind.
We're going to save the clouds for the end.
All right.
And finally, we have a lot of monitoring enhancements that we have done. One of the important things for IT admins is to know what's happening in the environment and how do you use this data to make decisions in terms of improving the experience for users even further.
And these go together because if you think about it, you can't manage if you don't monitor well, right? You got to have monitoring to have management. And things like these higher end user types have a different set of requirements. It's funny, I'm by no means dismissing knowledge workers. There's a lot more of them, so when they form a torch-bearing mob, you're in a lot more danger than just some angry engineers, right? So, but if you look at all of the things that we're releasing here, and we'll get into the details, the goal here is, again, to take it to the next level of enterprise, right? The next level of maturity to give you all the tools you need to succeed.
Tell us more about the Grid release that you had in August.
So for us, what August presents is two big changes. First of all, we're really doubling down on that higher end workflow, right? We've spent with M10 and everything that we've wrapped for the last year around the knowledge worker, it was time to come back and really start to put some serious emphasis behind the higher end workflow. So Quadro Virtual Data Center Workstation is that instead of thinking of things under the umbrella of just Grid, it's thinking about, if I'm talking about Quadro and I'm talking to a customer, am I talking to that customer about only one choice, or am I giving them the opportunity to look at their Quadro users in a new way, right? And so we're also introducing Pascal, and we'll get to that slide where I map this out, but Pascal is a whole nother layer of performance as well as amount of frame buffer to work with. So we're adding to your palette of options, your bandolier of options, right, to meet your customers' needs. And then, of course, Linux. Having Linux become a major player in terms of our support package combined, right, we both identified that, especially at these user types, Linux is a key operating system that has to be treated and supported with all the same feature parity. So the really back to the platform piece, and this is a build, and we're going to run out of time, so let's just move to, I think it's 2 clicks ahead. So what we've done is we've broken Grid aside into VPC and virtual apps. Quadro, VWS, represents all what's new in terms of higher end functionality. You'll notice as I'm going through all this that many of the things I'll be talking about, I'm not delineating between Pascal and Maxwell, and I'm talking about one single platform of software. Again, that advantage of I can pull in what I need for hardware underneath and then use software to define, manage, and maintain the user experience that's expected of these user types. So not just design, and rendering really wasn't part of the equation because historically you could only run anything with CUDA OpenCL compute on our largest profile. That's no longer true. You can now run it on all the smaller profiles, and we'll get to some more of that detail. But that enables me to enable more users across more user types within that organization. So instead of just delivering a high-end workstation to a high-end user and then have the manager or other people share some other resource to try to achieve that level, I can now spread that out. I can give people a right amount of performance they need to do their job. But again, all of that, right, that's opening a whole bunch of user types, which is great, but I wouldn't want to do that without management and monitoring. So working together, I'm excited to say that our NVML, our management library, all of that's now been incorporated into VROPS. You can now use VROPS as a nice single pane of glass. Want to tell us a little more about that?
Yep. I think we're going to cover that more through our slides.
So just real quick overview of August. Really, off the first box, I want to make two big notes. One, I just told you about the CUDA piece, which is the bottom bullet point, but the two above it, adding Pascal and also adding greater granularity in our profiles. Instead of even halves, 1, 2, 4, and 8, we now have smaller intermediary profiles to give you more adjustments in your knobs, your tuning, to deliver the exact right amount of performance to those user types. More efficient use of the available resources, giving you more benefit off of your customers' investments. And then the second bullet point, the fair share scheduler. We've added a QoS scheduler. So if you want to continue to use our existing round-robin time slice that has worked very well, great, absolutely. But you can also enable a QoS scheduler that will deliver the same consistent amount of performance for X amount of users per GPU to be defined by you. To give you that, again, that ability to make choices between, do I want pure performance based on use, or do I want to deliver a consistent amount of performance because I understand what that end user needs, right? Again, management, right? And then, of course, all of the usual benefits. We can't touch anything anymore without adding more scalability, more performance, 24 gigs of frame buffer on a P40, for example. And, of course, the management piece from VROPS, all the way to the application level, giving you visibility into processes within the guest as well as the host, understanding that entire ecosystem and where the benefit is, or where maybe you're needing more resources, but that granularity.
So for the workstation users, it's all about performance.
Absolutely.
You deliver them the best performance, they come back and say, not enough. We want the ultimate performance. So talk to us about what Pascal brings in terms of performance.
So just as a flat comparison, this is spec ViewPerf 12. For those of you that may or not be familiar with spec is a committee that develops. It's an agnostic, maybe not agnostic. It's made up of all of the various elements of the graphics community, ourselves, our competitors, you name it, and we developed benchmarks that we can all judge our products on and understand that performance. So this is an industry standard benchmark. And it runs, as you can see across the bottom, 3ds Max, CATIA, Creo, all the, medical, Siemens NX, you name it. These are all those primary big apps from big ISVs. And they're great benchmarks, great understanding of the performance of the GPU. But this is, again, this is a benchmark that's only telling me how hard my GPU can work, right? So it's a stand on the gas pedal till things blow up kind of test, right? And compared to an M60, if I take a single GPU, M60 having 2, and P40 has 1, and I run a single guest on that, and I run SpecView, that's the performance difference. So a massive uptick in performance from going from Maxwell to Pascal. And so that's the starting point. But that doesn't necessarily mean that Maxwell isn't the right answer for other things. M10, M60, still very much a part of your solution. In fact...
So, there's Tesla M cards, there's a Pascal. I think the biggest question I have is, which card do I choose?
Yeah.
I want to transform my entire enterprise. That means I need a card specific to each user's use case.
So, scalability and performance, they're both performance, right? If I go to a Quadro user, they don't understand scalability because they're used to their single workstation on their desktop, their race car, if you will, that's built for them on their desktop. We, on the other hand, all get virtualization, and we get scalability. It's a key piece of performance, maybe from a TCO perspective, but we need to be able to achieve scalability as well. So, if I'm more concerned about density and scalability, M10. If all I care about is delivering the peak performance that these users demand and always want more of, P40. If I'm in Blades, M6. Or the M60 if I'm looking for that balance between scalability and performance. Right? And then beneath, we've given you some sort of perspectives on what kind of user types would fall into that. I don't like those sorts of things because I will flat out tell you that if I go to a university and I look at freshman analysts or engineers or designers, they're not doing gigantic jobs, and I can fit them in a much smaller profile. So that might absolutely still have an M10. That would be more than sufficient, right? And we'll get to some sizing stuff in a bit, but on the other hand, by the time they graduate and they go on, and I'll make this comment again because I think it's so powerful, educational universities and colleges are minting the future users that are going to use all this, right? So they're exiting colleges with the expectation of having this. And so just understand that while those blue bars are some nice guidance, you need to look bigger and more of what's going on to better understand what's required from a resource perspective.
So NVIDIA has worked to deliver the best workstation experience from the data center. All this means nothing. I mean, you can provision your data center, you can put in the best grid cards, you can put the highest profiles, you can spend a ton of money doing all that to make sure that the users get what they need. In order to deliver that to the end user on any device, any location from anywhere, you need a protocol which does that, and that's where BlastExtreme comes in to deliver that experience. Earlier this year, we announced BlastExtreme Adaptive Transport. The goal of that was users were already getting a great experience within their LAN environment. Unlimited bandwidth, very low latencies, very low packet loss, so it didn't matter. They were very happy with what they were doing. One of the benefits of virtualization is mobility. You want to be able to access these desktops from any location in the world on any device. In order to do that, we needed to have a protocol which will adapt very well to different types of network conditions. That's why we brought in BlastExtreme Adaptive Transport. In addition to delivering a great frame rate, it also delivers additional benefits to the user in terms of transferring files. How much bandwidth is used? If lower bandwidth utilization is happening on the network, you're able to deliver a higher frame rate, which directly translates to what's the user experience for a WAN user. Frame rate, frame rate, frame rate. You give users 30 frames per second, they say that we want 60. The bandwidth doesn't change, the ISPs are not going to upgrade that quickly. That's the core focus for BlastExtreme Adaptive Transport, is how do we take the frames that is coming out of the GPUs and deliver that to the user as quickly as possible, and that's the core focus for BlastExtreme. We're focused on delivering an excellent 3D graphics experience. What does that mean? We have leveraged upon, BlastExtreme was built along standards. Unlike our previous protocol, PC/IP, which was more of a proprietary protocol, building upon standards has benefits. You have an ecosystem that's built around H.264 protocol. In addition to being able to offload the graphics processing for the different applications, you're also able to encode those frames using the NVIDIA GPUs. And we'll see some numbers later in terms of what does that translate to. We talked about snappy experience. This is all about delivering that snappy experience.
Absolutely.
We're no longer talking about desktops and apps in this session.
No.
We're really talking about workflows.
Correct.
And workloads and what enterprises are doing. This is about transforming what IT is doing and how they are leading the enterprise transformation. Cost still remains a king. You want to be able to quickly deploy things in your data center. You want to be able to scale. BlastExtreme allows you to do that. You can support users from different devices. You can give them one device at work, but they can access their desktops from anywhere in the world on any device. It really keeps the cost equation also quite simplified.
Which is why I like to refer to this slide as the "and" slide. I think a lot of times you look at optimizations and they tend to come with "ors." You can do this or you can do that. But when we worked with the Horizon team and incorporated NVN code, we really were hitting across an entire front of things so that you could deliver reduction in latency and a reduction in bandwidth, all of which equal and an improvement in scalability. If I can leave that encode process on the GPU, where it can be done better and faster than a CPU, and then fire it out over the wire, then frankly, the CPU doesn't have to do it. If the CPU doesn't have to do that, then it's doing something else, which goes back to snappiness and other things. If you look at, I don't know if we have this slide with us, but we have a slide that shows some subjective user testing, and one of those things was mail indexing. They don't help mail indexing from a GPU perspective, but if we can offload, then the CPU can help you on mail indexing, right? So this is a full benefit across all functionality. And then the latency piece isn't just about snappiness, right? It's not about just that. It's about, I have 51 milliseconds to play with, either from a performance, a feel standpoint, that snappiness, or I can be that much farther away with the experience I had before. And 51 milliseconds, I know from our data center guys that meant for us, Texas, from Santa Clara. if that becomes my radius that I can hire in, or have remote workers, or travel, or whatever, and have no difference in performance, no impact to my feel, that's huge. That changes all kinds of decisions that an enterprise makes.
Nice build slide. So we have question.
Most of this is straight from either PC over IP or with or without. So we're basically taking either with or without GPU. There's like 5 different tests here. Happy to show you that slide. But basically old protocol versus new, in short.
So we have done the comparison across different scenarios. One is you can have a data center with and without the grid. That's number one. You would generally never do 3D graphics workstations without an NVIDIA grid card, right? Given that, you have a choice of protocols with VMware. It's PC or IP or Blast Extreme. Blast and Blast Extreme are one and the same. It's just marketing. So take it as one protocol, okay? With PC or IP, you're able to do graphics offload. You get that advantage. However, when you want to encode those frames, you still rely on the CPU compute to be able to encode those frames before you send it on the wire. What that means is you increase your latency, you're also taxing your CPU. That means you're lowering your density. With Blast Extreme, since you're doing your graphics offload and immediately encoding those frames in hardware, you're not taxing your CPU, you've lowered your latencies, and that's where you see those differences. Okay? And we're happy to share that information, which we have done after this, and we'll stick around to answer more questions, so please stay with us.
Which actually worth mentioning, because I don't know that we're going to have enough time for Q&A. There's nothing in this room afterwards, so we're more than happy to hang out and pull up slides or share data and what have you. By no means trying to avoid the answer, it's just a long answer.
So we talked a lot about the Blast Extreme protocol, the challenges that it resolves, being able to deliver that experience from the data center to the end users. There's a great session on Blast Extreme later during the day, and I have given you the session ID. Please go check it out. There's going to be a lot of information shared about Blast Extreme protocol in terms of the advances that we have done over the last year and how the user experience has been significantly transformed with Blast Extreme protocol.
I want to jump to the next one because I'm excited about it. Linux. Who here has Linux desktops? I mean, this is the thing. I shouldn't be surprised. More hands than, I think our tendency is to always think about Windows, and it's just so clear that Linux has a major play in all of this space, especially in 3D workloads, where we see a tremendous amount of it, which is not to say we don't see Linux at the knowledge worker level as well. It's just we're opening up a world where there's so much more Linux. So support for Linux, it's been a key initiative. We have supported Linux for a while, but I think our core focus has been how do we improve the Linux experience, especially for those 3D graphics users. So we've gone ahead and integrated the H.264 encode capabilities even for Linux desktops. So users should be able to deploy either a Linux workstation or a Windows workstation, depending on the availability of your applications, but they should get a great experience independent of which operating system that they choose. Yep. Let's talk about insights. Management.
What the IT admin loves is he has his data center, he has the desktops, he wants to monitor it, he wants to understand what's happening in his data center, he wants to make sure that in addition to users getting the best experience, he has a single pane of glass where he can monitor everything that's happening from the data center to what the users are experiencing. So we went and integrated VGPUs monitoring into our VROP solution. We can monitor CPU, RAM, the GPU consumption, all of those on a single pane of glass. Once you're able to monitor and you have a lot of the data, there's a lot of benefits you can drive from that data.
And it's also important to note that also during our release, we're adding, again, more monitors, more metrics, more availability for visibility into the various, both guest and the host of your GPU accelerated environment. So while VROPS is ramping up its single pane of glass, so to speak, we're adding more and more metrics to that. So why is that so important? Sizing. We're always asked, how many users can I get on a host server? I selected this because it's a knowledge worker, and since we started this presentation talking about that being, sort of that fundamental starting point, understand that this same methodology would absolutely work for any user, no matter what their workload is. This is a great way to try to define that user and understand how to build a solution around them. The first graph shows me the amount of frame buffer utilization for this particular user type. This is on our Project Cirrus tool that we've built with the knowledge worker workload. So this is, Excel, Chrome, you name it. It's really not a 3D app, but I'm trying to keep it down to a frame buffer level that I think would resonate with anybody. And you'll notice that at peak, it's maybe 650 megs of frame buffer. So that's Windows 10, that's Office 2016, and it's being used over a period of time, and that's what we saw. So we know then that 1 gig of frame buffer is sufficient, 512 meg would be insufficient, and that would not give us the performance we were looking for. But I don't need to go to 2, right? Or any other larger frame buffer. Now, if I were to do this same for a 3D worker, and I saw that they needed a 4 gig profile, right, because they're using 3.5 on average, well, again, all this works for them as well. With VROPS, you'll have an ability to go in and see all this data and make those decisions, right? If they complain about performance, you can go look and say, wow, you're really pegging full frame buffer, and that's probably overflowing into system memory, and there goes all your performance advantage, right? The next 2 graphs, the middle one is our render engine, right? It's the GPU, what we traditionally think of as GPU. And as you can see, this particular user is using, 60, 65%, maybe as much as 70, 75% GPU for their app stack, right? But remember that a GPU is not a CPU. CPUs get really upset at 100% utilization, or even less than that. We, on the other hand, think the GPU is finally working hard at 100%. So we have plenty of bandwidth, is the point, from a render engine perspective. And on the very end, encode. Right? A lot of talk about the importance of encode. It's a key piece to Blast. What it's showing here is that I am not changing that many frames, and I'm thus not using that much in actual worker workflow, right? And this is 8 VMs. I'm not changing that many frames, so I'm not using that much of my encode bandwidth. In other words, I have picked the right profile and the right GPU in order to meet this end user's needs. Right? It's that simple.
Super. So all of you were excited about some of the tech previews. I'm sure a lot of you are excited about looking at Vmotion. So we're going to hold that to the last. We're going to talk about some of the improved workflows. So one of the things that we have started doing is ElasticStream delivers a great user experience for a single user, right? Now, when I meant single user, that means if I'm looking at my screen, my desktop, it's one-to-one. There are many workflows in the organization today where you don't work in silos. Whether you're an architectural firm, automobile firm, you have people and engineers who do design. Once they do the design, it goes through review cycles. We are enabling ElasticStream to actually have that collaborative effort where a user can invite another user into the desktop within his session. What does that mean? It simplifies from an IT admin perspective the need for you to go and acquire third-party tools. We see a lot of our customers using third-party tools today to enable collaboration where 2 users can be looking at the same design. Now, these users don't have to be sitting next to each other. They can be in different cities, or they can be in different continents. But the productivity continues. Let us show you a quick demo. We're using the Team Peter Parker across this in this event. So I'm going to use.
I didn't actually get to see this demo until about 2 hours ago, and it's funny. 3.5 years ago, a major oil company was demanding this from us.
So if you look at what Peter Parker is doing, Peter Parker is designing his next supersonic jet. Right? He has a lot of spare time. Once he designs his supersonic engine, he wants to invite another user to come and review his design. He wants to be sure he didn't make any mistakes. He wants to get the approval from a reviewer. Right from within his desktop, he's able to invite a reviewer, Marilyn in this case, and He types in her user ID, and he's able to immediately send a customized email to Marilyn. When that happens, Marilyn gets an email, she clicks on a link, and immediately it takes her into Peter Parker's session. Now both of them are seeing the exact same desktop. Peter Parker is able to pass control of the desktop to Marilyn so that she can make changes, she can review, she can turn things around, she can look at different angles and make sure that she's satisfied without having to tell Peter Parker, can you do this, can you do this, can you do this? It all happens in a single workflow. Once the review is complete and Marilyn is happy that the design is perfect, she gives back control to Peter Parker and he has full access to his desktop. All from within your desktop session. You guys like it? Thank you. By the way, there's a funny term here. We didn't talk about it.
What?
I call this tech preview. What do you call this?
Oh, yeah. Are there any lawyers in the room? Turns out we have to call things tech demos, and he has to call things tech previews. So, no mistaken. Either way,
it's the same.
We're legally covered.
I'm sure you're excited about some of the things we're working on.
Don't share any of this when you leave the room. No, I'm kidding.
A lot of you have talked about, this is specifically for IT admins, right? We talked about enterprise transformation, running their workloads. That means IT admins need to have more and more control of what the end users are doing. If a designer is working during the day, 8 hours, 10 hours, and at night, if you want to run other workloads, compute workloads, the IT admin needs to have control of those desktops so that he can reuse the hardware resources to do some of the jobs.
You remember that earlier slide that I talked about? All of these workflows are now available, and that anywhere in the data center that you see GPUs, those silos can now be sort of brought in under the umbrella. Here is, in my opinion, one of the more important features, this idea of suspended. I think Vmotion is the thing that people get really excited about, but I would argue as we talk about expanding these workflows and you're enabling brand new areas of support for end users who do things like load a 24 gig frame buffer with a massive model and then render it against that, or HPC if they're doing some heavy duty compute job. This may take longer than the overnight that you might have available for that freed up resource. So if I can suspend that, then I don't have to quit the job, I don't have to unload, resave that file, then reload it back up, re-kick the job back off and hope it finishes the next night, right? I have an ability to manage these workflows in a way that's intelligent with the amount of resources I have available. So to me, suspend and resume is actually a far cooler feature and more meaningful for some of these workflows than honestly even Vmotion.
Yeah. So Vmotion really comes in when you're in an emergency situation. You have to do a quick maintenance on the host, or you have to take down a host. So you have to migrate the user from one host to the other. That's when you would look at Vmotion. But if you have a planned use case where during the day you're using these desktops for design purposes, and during the evening or in the night you're using it for other works, you can do that with Suspend and Resume, all without interrupting the user. So let's actually take a look at a tech previews of both Suspend, Resume and Vmotion. So I have on the right side, it's the user screen, and on the left is the admin screen. In this case, the user is designing a bringing up a 3D graphics application, launching into the layout, doing his work, and at the end of the day, he just locks his desktop and leaves for the day. The IT admin on the left side wants to make sure that the hardware resources are leveraged for other purposes in the night. So he can quickly go into those VMs and he can right click on it and say suspend that particular VM. Once he suspends the VM, those resources are now freed up where he can go deploy it for other tasks. IT admin also has the opportunity where if he wants to migrate that VM to a different server, he can do so in the same workflow. Once that's all done and his compute workload is complete, and he knows that the user is going to come back the next day at 8 a.m. and log into his desktop, he wants to make sure that the desktops are ready for the users to come and log in. So he can power on those desktops. When the user comes in the next day, he logs in using Horizon Client back into his desktops, and boom, his status saved right there. The end user did not even know that his VM was suspended, the hardware resources were used for a different workload, and then it was reloaded back.
If you're doing a workload that involves CUDA or OpenCL, you're doing compute, you're talking about something that will run our GPU at 100%. So being able to spend something that's moving at that speed, putting that much load on a system, freeze that moment in time and protect the data and the work that's been done so far, and be able to move, manage, restore that in its exact state is incredibly powerful. It takes all that fear and trepidation out of those user types, lets them know that, no, I can have all the advantages of virtualization, all the stuff that we've had for VMs forever, and now I can bring that to your extreme workflow and solve all sorts of problems.
Like that? Oh. The best for the last. So we've been working together for ages to get Vmotion support with VGPU. It's a complex problem. It's not a simple one. As a product manager, I think it's a simple problem to solve, right? We already supported Vmotion with vSphere. How much time does it take to enable VGPU support in there? It's just a checkbox, right? It's not. Apparently, it's a complex problem. That's why I'm not an engineer.
Tell an engineer you said that.
But here is a demo of Vmotion. This is during the day. You want to make an emergency host maintenance. You want to apply a patch. You want to take down the host. Or you just want to optimize your farm. And you want to move the user from one host to the other. It's a very quick way of doing it using Vmotion, where there's hardly any interrupt for the end user. It's just a few seconds, but the user is going to, he will notice the glitch, but it's going to be very minimal that it doesn't impact his productivity. Let's take a look at this demo. Oops. There you go. So on the right is the client. I'm running a benchmark. Benchmarks are great for showing such demos. On the left is the admin, and he wants to do maintenance on the particular host. He selects the VM, selects the host, and he wants to migrate the user from one host to the other. Once it's complete, he's able to spin off that job, and you'll notice momentarily on the right that the screen freezes for about 5 seconds. By the way, this video is unedited. We recorded this entire video in 50 seconds. Within a matter of seconds, the VM is migrated from one host to the other, and the user is up and running. So you literally saw a glitch of about 5-6 seconds where the frame rate slowed down, but immediately it came back, and the user was able to continue whatever he was doing without even being aware that he was just migrated from one host to the other.
If you've heard us present before, me specifically, you know I've talked about how hard it is to do motion. And to give you some specifics around that, if you think in terms of frames per second, and at 60 frames per second, I've got 16 milliseconds frames to do anything that would, without interrupting the next frame, right? And that would be something that the user would notice. And as we move up in these user types, they become more and more sensitive to frames per second and latency and everything else, right? So I basically, in order to capture state and move that VM from host A to host B, I have 16 milliseconds. How far can you go in 16 milliseconds, right? 32 milliseconds at 30 frames per second. You can move. It can be done, and there you go. And in fact, in theory, I should probably ping John at the booth and make sure it's up. But in theory, come to our booth. We brought enough gear to do this, and check it out. We have it running. So don't take our video as evidence. Come see it for yourselves. Again, it's a tech preview. It's very beta, and forgive me if I'm whacking it with a stick when you walk up and cussing and screaming. So
this demo does deserve an applause, doesn't it?
Yeah.
Thank you.
Cool.
Thank you. So we have talked a lot about what we have done together.
Yeah.
What's all this if you don't have a validation from a customer? I love to hear from customers all the time. So why don't we go ahead and invite John Kelly from University of Arkansas.
Come on up, John. The other side. Yep.
You may want to come up to this mic. Sorry.
Jump to the next slide. So one of the things that the reason we invited John is, again, my earlier comment about education being the mint that's forging the users of the future, if you will. And knowing what I know of your story, really one of your starting points was labs, right? Where people go in and have to work with a workstation and do their homework and that sort of thing. Maybe talk a little bit about why that was your starting point and where you went from there.
Yeah, so one of the main things had looked at the different devices that existed, and we said all these things have GPUs. Why should VDI be different? We think that the type of work that's being done by students, creative work, even the knowledge work that you've talked about with Windows 10, our target was Windows 10, and we thought, okay, if we're doing Windows 10, if we're going to sink all our resources into that, let's give it a GPU, let it have that. And we thought we could have the most success around the lab environment because it covers the most use cases. So base level delivery of those knowledge and creative apps, and then we can build on top of that. So that was the primary driver for that, and it took us about months to go from taking delivery of the hardware to having those GPU labs available, which was pretty awesome. And then I would say that, you know, there were a lot of things that the GPU made table stakes as part of our install, and then it enabled more platforms that we didn't even think. So we have a game design studio on our campus, and their mission is to make these interactive games that are educational experiences. So what we could do for them was provide the higher end GPU profiles for them to do their work in Unity and Maya and 3ds Max, do the modeling and all that, but then have a lower profile for them to have as a target for the game platform. So we had, you know, we basically gave them something that was like a console by having this VDI environment, and they could target that as their base level to designing. So they're using the VDI for both consistent delivery of the game and their game development.
Actual creation piece. So instead of two physical workstations meeting two different hardware requirements, so to speak.
Or in the student's case, Chromebook, MacBook Air, all those very GPU, you know, variances.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Excellent.
Yeah. And then of course, one of the first targets was our Fay Jones School of Architecture. They had the architectural needs. They wanted to do things in the Autodesk suite and things like that. So those are driving the next iteration. And like you guys said earlier, the pieces that are basic, the knowledge worker piece, it's almost like we don't have to think about that piece anymore. We put GPUs in servers, and now we start thinking about the potential. This suspend resume stuff is exciting for me because, you know, as a university, I'd love to be able to reuse those cycles at night for things like machine learning and AI research while we're doing VDI.
And does management look at that as you know, a better TCO ROI? I mean, are they identifying the fact that they're taking dollars that used to be in separate piles and putting that together and solving far more efficiently?
So we look at some of that ROI, but honestly, there is a portion of this that is intangible. You can't put a dollar figure on the frustration that comes from having an inconsistent experience or glitches or things like that, or people just getting, you know, fed up with a bad experience. So, you know, the numbers come out for us to where it made sense to put the GPUs in there. It's worth the investment, but the intangible pieces are where we see more value. Yeah.
Cool.
And then one more note on that, you know, as you guys were talking about the Blast Extreme, you know, as an R1 university, we have an enormous pipe coming into our data center. We have 100 gig coming in our data center, but we're in Arkansas, and there's 17 campuses in our system. A lot of them are rural, semi-rural. So when we think about being able to deliver those experiences from our campus out to those different institutions, you know, using Blast Extreme, being able to optimize for the WAN and tweak those settings to get just the right delivery, that's awesome.
Great.
Excellent.
Thank you very much, John. We appreciate having you here.
We have time for, we don't, we're at the top. All right, we'll stick around. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So we do have some resources. We're going to share these as part of the deck that you can download later.